Right now, you're probably wearing something soft against your skin. A cotton t-shirt maybe. Joggers. That hoodie you've worn 3 days straight, but nobody needs to know that. You probably have a washing machine 10 feet from where you're sitting. A glowing, humming box that eats your dirty clothes and hands them back smelling like a mountain breeze that has never existed in nature. You toss in a pod, press a button, scroll your phone for 45 minutes, and it's done. Clean clothes. No thought required. Now rewind 10,000 years. There is no machine. There is no soap, not as you'd recognize it. There is no cotton, no synthetic fabric, no dye that doesn't come from crushing a beetle or boiling tree bark. Your clothes are animal skins stitched together with sinew, or rough plant fibers beaten and twisted by hand over dozens of hours, and they are filthy. Coated in wood smoke, animal fat, sweat, blood, and dirt, so deeply ground in that the garment itself is becoming a biohazard. You can't just make new ones. A single hide tunic might represent 3 days of hunting, skinning, brain tanning, and stitching. Throwing it away would be like torching a week of your life. So the question is simple. For tens of thousands of years, with no detergent, no plumbing, no machines, how did human beings keep their clothes clean enough to survive wearing them? And the answer is stranger, more creative, and more disgusting than you'd ever guess. Let's start with the most obvious solution, because it's the one that's wrong. You'd assume ancient people just washed their clothes in water. River nearby, dunk the garment, wring it out, done. But here's what nobody tells you. Water alone is almost useless against the kind of filth your ancestors were dealing with. Animal fats, body oils, ground-in soot from living inside smoke-filled shelters. These are hydrophobic substances. That's a fancy way of saying they literally repel water. You could soak a greasy hide in a river for a week and pull it out still greasy. Water slides right off oil the same way it beads on a waxed car. Your ancestors figured this out fast. And instead of giving up, they got creative in ways that would make a modern chemist raise an eyebrow. The first real breakthrough wasn't soap. It was dirt. Specific kinds of dirt. Certain clays, particularly a type called Fuller's earth, have a molecular structure that actually absorbs grease and oil. The clay particles bond to the fat molecules and pull them away from the fabric. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamia, dating to around 2500 BCE, shows that Sumerians were deliberately mining and trading specific clays for textile cleaning. They called the process fulling, and the people who did it were called fullers, one of the oldest specialized professions in human history. These weren't just people rubbing mud on shirts. They were proto-chemists who understood, on a practical level, principles of surface chemistry that wouldn't be formally described for another 4,000 years. But clay only solved part of the problem. It handled grease. It didn't handle smell. It didn't handle the biological contamination, the bacteria breeding in sweat-soaked fibers, the parasites nestling into seams. For that, your ancestors turned to something you'd never expect. Think about this for a second. What's one of the most readily available chemical substances any human community produces every single day in large quantities that also happens to be a powerful alkaline cleaning agent? The answer is urine. Human urine. And before you recoil, this wasn't some desperate last resort hack. This was an industrial-scale, professionally organized cleaning technology that lasted for thousands of years. In ancient Rome, urine collection was so critical to the textile industry that Emperor Vespasian, around 70 CE, placed a tax on it. A tax on pee. Fulleries, the ancient equivalent of laundromats, had large stone basins set into the street where passers-by were encouraged to relieve themselves. Workers called fullones would collect this urine, let it age in vats until the urea broke down into ammonia, and then use it to clean togas and tunics. The process worked because ammonia is a brutal degreaser and antimicrobial agent. It strips oils, kills bacteria, and brightens white fabrics. Archaeologists excavating the Fullery of Stephanus in Pompeii, preserved under volcanic ash since 79 CE, found the entire operation still intact. Treading basins where workers stomped on urine-soaked cloth. rinsing channels fed by aqueduct water, drying frames on the roof. It was a factory, a pea-powered factory, but a factory nonetheless. And Rome wasn't unique. Cultures across the ancient world landed on the same solution independently. In Scotland, walking, the process of cleaning and shrinking woven wool, traditionally involved soaking cloth in aged urine and then rhythmically pounding it by hand or foot while singing work songs. This practice survived in the Scottish Highlands into the early 20th century. In parts of rural India and West Africa, similar ammonia-based cleaning methods persisted for centuries. The chemistry is universal, the biology is universal, so the solution kept appearing everywhere, across thousands of miles and thousands of years, because human beings are nothing if not pragmatic about survival. Here's the part nobody talks about, though. Cleaning was only half the battle. The other half was preventing clothes from getting catastrophically dirty in the first place. And this is where your ancestors were genuinely brilliant. Smoke was one of the earliest preservation technologies. If you've ever wondered why ancient peoples spent so much time around fires, beyond warmth and cooking, part of the answer is their clothing. Smoke contains phenolic compounds and formaldehyde, both of which are antimicrobial. Hanging animal skin garments in smoke didn't just dry them. It chemically treated them, killing bacteria, repelling insects, and slowing the decomposition of the hide itself. The Inuit peoples of the Arctic developed an extraordinarily sophisticated version of this. Their caribou skin parkas were designed in layers, an inner layer worn fur side in, an outer layer worn fur side out, creating an insulating air gap. But critically, the hides were prepared using a smoke tanning process that made them naturally resistant to moisture and bacterial growth. Research published by the Canadian Museum of History documented that traditionally prepared caribou hides could resist bacterial colonization significantly longer than untreated skins. The engineering was so effective that modern textile scientists have studied Inuit garment construction to inform the design of extreme weather gear. And smoke wasn't the only preventive strategy. Many ancient cultures used aromatic plants, not just because they smelled nice, but because they contained genuine antimicrobial compounds. Lavender, rosemary, juniper, and cedar were commonly packed with stored clothing or rubbed into fabrics. In ancient Egypt, linen garments were sometimes treated with oils from the moringa tree, which researchers at the University of Freiburg found contains pterogospermin, a compound with measurable antibacterial properties. Your ancestors didn't know the word antibacterial. They knew that certain plants kept their clothes from rotting and their skin from breaking out in sores. That was enough. Practical knowledge doesn't need a laboratory to be real. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that might shift how you think about all of this. Because so far we've been talking about cleaning and preserving clothes as if the goal was the same as yours, keeping a favorite outfit fresh. But for most of human history, the relationship between people and their clothing was fundamentally different from anything you've experienced. You own dozens of garments, maybe hundreds. You buy a shirt, wear it a season, and forget about it. But for a Neolithic farmer or a Bronze Age herder, a single garment might represent an almost incomprehensible investment of labor. Textile researcher Elizabeth Wayland Barber, in her landmark 1991 book Prehistoric Textiles, estimated that producing enough hand-spun, hand-woven linen cloth for one tunic could take an experienced weaver over 200 hours of work. 200 hours for one tunic. That's 5 weeks of full-time labor. When a garment represents that much of your life, you don't throw it away because it smells. You don't discard it because it's stained. You fix it, you treat it, you adapt. And this is exactly what the archaeological record shows. Textile fragments recovered from the Hallstatt salt mines in Austria, some dating to around 1000 BCE, show evidence of repeated mending, patching, and re-dyeing. Garments weren't cleaned to look new. They were cleaned to remain functional, a different standard entirely. The goal wasn't pristine. The goal was wearable. And wearable had a much wider definition than you or I would be comfortable with. This also explains something else that puzzles modern people about the ancient world: the sheer prevalence of perfumes, incense, and aromatic oils in almost every civilization. The Egyptians burned kaifi, the The Romans bathed in scented oils. Medieval Europeans carried pomanders, small balls of perfume, everywhere they went. We tend to interpret this as luxury, as vanity, but a lot of it was simply practical. When your cleaning technology can get clothes to functional, but not to fresh, you bridge the gap with fragrance. Perfume wasn't decadence. It was the final step in a cleaning process that couldn't finish the job alone. And there's one more layer to this that deserves attention, because it changes the whole picture. Many ancient cultures didn't just clean clothes differently, they designed clothes to be cleanable in ways that modern fashion has completely abandoned. The Roman toga was essentially a massive single piece of draped wool. No stitching, no tailoring, no complex construction. Why? Partly because flat, unstructured fabric is dramatically easier to clean than a tailored garment. You can lay it flat, beat it, soak it, stretch it on a frame to dry, all things that are nearly impossible with a fitted jacket or structured dress. The same logic appears in the Indian sari, the Japanese kimono, the West African wrapper, the Greek chiton. Across the ancient world, the dominant clothing forms were rectangles. Flat pieces of cloth, wrapped, draped, tied, pinned. Dr. Gillian Vogelsang Eastwood, former director of the Textile Research Center in Leiden, has argued that this wasn't a lack of tailoring skill. It was a deliberate design philosophy shaped partly by the need to maintain and clean these textiles with the tools available. When your cleaning method involves beating cloth against rocks in a river, your clothes had better be able to survive being beaten against rocks in a river. Form followed function. It always does. So step back now and look at the full picture. Your ancestors faced a problem that was genuinely harder than it sounds. Their clothes trapped grease that water couldn't touch, harbored bacteria that could cause disease, and represented so many hours of labor that replacing them was barely an option. And they answered each challenge. They found clays that could pull oil from fabric at a molecular level. They discovered that aged urine, the most unglamorous substance imaginable, was a powerful cleaning agent, and they built entire industries around it. They used smoke and plant compounds to prevent contamination before it started. They designed their clothing in shapes that could survive brutal cleaning methods. And when none of it was quite enough, they filled the gap with fragrance, turning necessity into art. None of this was primitive. All of it was problem-solving under constraints that would paralyze most modern engineers. These were people working without theory, without instruments, without controlled experiments, arriving at chemically sound solutions through centuries of observation, failure, and adaptation. That's not ignorance. That's intelligence operating with different tools. Tonight, you'll probably toss something in the wash without thinking about it. You'll hear the water fill, the drum start to spin, and you won't think about the thousands of years of human ingenuity compressed into that moment. The clays of Mesopotamia, the urine vats of Pompeii, the smoke-treated caribou hides of the Arctic, the weaver who spent 200 hours on a single tunic and then spent another hour beating it against a river stone to keep it alive for one more season. Every clean shirt you own is a debt to 10,000 years of people who refuse to accept filth as permanent.